governing body say they still need access to historic doping samples.
More on that later, and with the weather, Chris Fawkes.
Well, Simon, today's been the chilliest day of the week for many areas, but the weather's on the turn. It's going to turn milder for the rest of the week. The downside is it's going to be cloudy and wet with some very strong winds coming our way for Friday, so I'll be looking ahead to that.
I shall see you later as well, Chris. Thank you very much. Also coming up here on Afternoon Live.
Et on s'est dit qu'on allait faire un truc un peu comme ça. Est-ce que tu sais twerker?
Non.
Claims of sexism as the first female winner of football's Ballon d'Or is asked if she knows how to twerk. Hello, good afternoon. You're watching Afternoon Live from Westminster with me, Simon McCoy. The Prime Minister will urge MPs to back her Brexit deal later as the government becomes embroiled in a constitutional row with Parliament. Theresa May will begin 5 days of debate in the House of Commons on her Brexit plan before the crunch vote next week. But as she prepares to do that, her government is facing intense criticism over claims it's in contempt of Parliament by refusing to publish the full legal guidance given to ministers about the withdrawal agreement. That debate on the contempt motion is currently underway in the Commons. Another half hour or so of that, we think. Now, if it loses, it'll be the first time a government has been held in contempt of Parliament in modern history. The motion does not call for any sanctions against ministers, and it's unclear whether it would force the government to publish the legal advice in full. Afterwards, the House will start 5 days of debate, leading to the meaningful vote on the Brexit agreement, which will take place in the evening of the 11th of December. Well, earlier today, Europe's top legal officer said it would be acceptable for the UK to revoke Article 50 without asking for permission from other EU members. Labour's shadow Brexit Secretary Sir Keir Starmer opened today's debate in Parliament by accusing ministers of ignoring a binding Commons vote, demanding they release the full legal advice they received on the Brexit plan. Let's just listen to what Sir Keir Starmer said.
Yesterday, the government published a reasoned position paper. That was not legal advice. It simply described the deal. It was a synopsis. It was in the nature of an explainer having already been published when the deal was published. It was a long way from legal advice. The attorney made a statement to the House and then he answered questions. But the government did not publish the full and final advice by the Attorney General to the Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, that is the long and short of it. The government is willfully refusing to comply with a binding order of this House, and that is contempt.
Well, responding to Sir Keir Starmer's comments, Andrea Leadsom, the leader of the House of Commons, defended the Attorney General Geoffrey Cox and said he could not have been clearer yesterday when he published his legal advice.
The issue at hand is not one of substantive content. As yesterday's questioning illustrated, there is no real dispute as to the meaning and legal effect of the withdrawal agreement, and the Attorney General could not have been clearer about the legal position yesterday. In fact, Mr. Speaker, no honourable member could say in all honesty that the Attorney General has done anything other than treat this House with the greatest of respect. There can be no question that he or the government has acted in a manner which is contemptuous of this House.
So in the next few hours or so, the Prime Minister will set out the case for her Brexit deal when she opens 5 days of debate in the House of Commons. Our political correspondent Nick Eardley reports.
After months of Brexit back and forth, the government has a week left to sell its plan. Next Tuesday, Parliament will vote on Theresa May's deal. Without parliamentary approval, it can't go ahead. And after a savaging from various sides in recent days, it's a mammoth task for ministers. But if the man whose job it is to sell the deal to Conservative MPs is worried, he isn't letting on.
I'm feeling very, very confident.
He might be smiling now, but there are plenty of headaches for the government at the moment. Ministers could be found in contempt of Parliament this afternoon after refusing to publish their full Brexit legal advice.
We're being asked as MPs to make probably the most important decision that we will take in Parliament. We're doing it on behalf of hundreds of thousands of constituents, and we ought to do it in full sight of the advice, and it would be irresponsible of us to proceed knowing that the advice is there and to not request it.
The government has ordered a summary, but law officers insist legal advice must stay confidential.
They've had the fullest and frankest disclosure from the government. It's now time to stop playing games and get on with the real issues.
There's a good chance that Parliament is about to find the government in contempt. There's a good chance you could lose the meaningful vote. Have you not just lost control of this process?
Look, this is a lively Parliament without a majority for any particular party. It's always going to be a tough challenge, and we are, I think, set to deliver a Brexit that the people voted for and that, frankly, the country's crying out for us to get on with.
Later, the PM will argue her plan offers a better future outside the EU, delivering what people voted for while keeping a close economic relationship. But Theresa May faces the battle of her political life in the coming days.
It'll not just be ourselves, there'll be a large number of Conservatives who will be voting against this deal next week as well. They've already expressed that publicly, they've told the whips that that will be the case. So the government is going to have to look at its own policy, because it can't even carry that policy.
I'll be making the case that this should go back to the people, because I think we know that Theresa May's deal doesn't have support of a majority in Parliament. No other proposal, including no deal at all, has support in Parliament.
At the moment, it's almost impossible to see how Theresa May gets Parliament to back her plan next Tuesday. Some have already written her off, but others say it's too early to do that. She's delivered against the odds before, and it's possible, just possible, they say, she could do it again. 5 days of intense debate start later. Then Parliament has a huge decision. The Brexit debate is about to reach a crescendo. Nick Eardley, BBC News, Westminster.
It looks like Sunday's TV debate between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn is not going to happen. Just had a statement from the BBC, which I will just read to you now. We are disappointed that we could not reach an agreement on the BBC's proposal for a debate on Brexit. We have been clear throughout the whole of the process that, as well as a substantive head-to-head debate, any programme we broadcast would need to include other views, including other political parties, to reflect the wide range of views the public and parliamentarians hold about Brexit. Now, the statement goes on. The final proposal we put to both of the main parties was for a head-to-head debate between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, followed by a discussion between 8 panellists, including politicians with a wide range of views on Brexit, and ending with further head-to-head debate and closing statements. We believe ours was a fair and appropriate format for those taking part, and crucially for our audiences around the country, and it is a shame we will not be able to bring them this programme. However, we will keep our audiences informed with extensive news coverage and analysis. Nowhere in that statement does it say it's definitely not happening, but clearly responding there to a decision taken somewhere that that TV debate is not taking place. Let's go to our chief political correspondent, Vicky Young, who's in central lobby. Well, it gets muddier and muddier, all this, doesn't it?
Do you know, in some ways, Simon, I feel that this sums up the whole division there is over the entire Brexit debate, that we can't even get to a point where there's any agreement over a debate about Brexit. It's clear that both sides wanted something different. Jeremy Corbyn has said he would like the ITV proposal much more. It's a head-to-head with the Prime Minister and nothing more than that. Theresa May preferred the BBC's scenario, and they just can't agree on all of that. Now, the only way a debate will go ahead is if Theresa May agrees to the ITV format. I would predict that that's not going to happen.
So, well, as you say, it sort of fits in with the general mood here of we really don't know what's happening, and including with the debate that's going on now, has been going on now for several hours. Now, just talk us through what we can expect on this contempt motion, because my understanding is we might be getting a result, what, in the next half hour or so?
Well, it doesn't look very hopeful, I have to say. I mean, we just don't know, given that this could go on until 7 o'clock. What is quite strange is that I was told a while ago that there'd been an informal agreement, as these things do happen, cross-party, behind the scenes, that it was maybe 3 hours that it could go on for, and probably no more than that. So, you know, we're beyond that now. Several Conservatives are being called, and I don't think anyone else from the other parties is being called. There is some suggestion this is being maybe possibly kept going by Conservatives. Now, we don't know why, but we do know that coming up after this, before Theresa May even gets up, is a very contentious debate about what could happen if Theresa May's deal doesn't go through. Now, it could be that this is something to do with that, because we're hearing that the Conservative rebels feel they have the numbers to get through an amendment which they say would allow Parliament to have a much greater say in what happens down the line in a couple of weeks' time if Theresa May's deal doesn't go through. Now, we've heard a lot about a meaningful vote, about Parliament taking control, making its views clear about what should happen next. That's what the Dominic Grieve amendment is all about. That is coming up after this debate finishes, and it sounds to me from talking to various Conservative MPs and sources that they do have the numbers, along with the opposition parties, to defeat the government on that. So we'll have to see what happens with all of that. There's even a suggestion the government might accept the amendment. And just to be clear, because it's getting fiendishly complicated, as you know, but that's all about what happens if Theresa May's deal is not passed. The government has 21 days to come up and give its suggestion about what it's going to do next. What MPs are pushing for is to have a much more meaningful say in what they think, what the House of Commons thinks should happen at that point.
It's all very procedural and all very House of Commons in, isn't it? But if you're a member of the audience watching what's going on and you're hearing that, well, Conservatives are just trying to string this out so they can work out how they're going to approach the next vote, it's what people have got really fed up with in this whole procedure, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think a lot of this goes back to that rather disastrous decision that the Prime Minister made to hold a general election. You know, disastrous for her because she lost to the majority the Conservatives had. And this really is the reality of dealing and leading a government that doesn't have a majority. You know, she has the DUP, which are propping her up, but they are, you know, clearly lukewarm about certain things. They're pretty angry about some of the things that are in her Brexit withdrawal agreement, so that's not really functioning properly. She doesn't have a majority otherwise, and the issue of Brexit is incredibly divisive. So, you know, we're left in this situation where she's got the best deal she thinks she can get. She obviously wants to get up at probably now maybe 7 o'clock this evening, start making that case again at the beginning of 5 days of debate to win over MPs. You know, there is a possibility that if this Dominic Grieve amendment goes through later, it could help her case because she can go to the Brexiteers and say, look, it could be very uncertain. If you vote down my deal, you have no guarantee of what kind of deal you're going to get. And the possibility, again, of no Brexit, she will say, is there, and it's a very live debate. So, you know, things can change in 5 days, but as I've said to you many times before, there are not many people that I'm speaking to here who think that she can get that deal through Parliament.
Never tire of hearing of it. Vicky, we'll be talking to you later on. Vicky Young there in Central Lobby. Well, as you know, Brexit a divisive issue, and protesters have been here in Westminster today making their voices heard. This is just what one of our guests, the Labour MP Rupa Huq, this is how she dealt with it a little earlier.
These are the Brexiteers that were meant to be in charge of the whole thing. I'm on your side!
What?
Oh, which side are
you're hearing, I know, you're hearing it's better than mine because I don't know who they're representing because actually
we've got both sides here, have we?
It's been Stop Brexit for the last 2 weeks.
But this just shows how our country has descended into farce, chaos, disarray. And I think the only way out of this is a people's vote.
Right, well, let's talk to Chuka Umunna, who's Labour MP for Streatham, who's with me now. Now, in the last few minutes, the BBC's put out a statement that they won't be able to host the debate because nobody seems to be able to agree on what is an acceptable format. Doesn't mean there won't be a debate, because ITV, we know, has a proposal. What would you like to see?
I think what your viewers and what the electorate would want to see is all views in this Brexit debate represented. And both parties have a variety of different views within them. But this isn't like a general election scenario where you have all views represented simply by dint of both of the main political parties being on the platform. Because, of course, the Prime Minister wants to pursue a deeply damaging Brexit, in my view. My party wishes to pursue what Jeremy Corbyn has called a jobs-first Brexit. But actually there's a whole swathe of people out in the country who would like this to be referred back to the people through a people's vote. You know, you had 700,000 people marching through these streets and the rest of the streets in London.
Another people's vote.
yeah, we delivered a petition that over 1.3 million people signed yesterday to 10 Downing Street, and it's really important that they have a voice. And dare I say, you know, if you want the kind of extreme...
Haven't they all had a voice?
Well, hang on just a minute. You know, if you want the kind of Brexit that, say, Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson have advocated, you probably want your voice represented too. So I think it's extremely important that all four of those kind of bodies of opinion are represented in any debate.
The assumption here is that Theresa May is not going to get this vote through. If she doesn't, what should happen after that?
Well, if she doesn't get the vote through, I think the indications are that she will seek to come back to Parliament a second time after going to the European Council meeting in December on the 13th and the 14th of December and then come back. To my mind, what I would say to those observing the debate, but also fellow parliamentarians who, you know, some particularly in the Prime Minister's party want to wait and see whether her deal falls, I think that is this is no longer a question, that's inevitable. And so I would urge those who want to wait before it falls, before committing to getting on board with referring this back to your viewers. I'd urge them to get on board now. There are others, some in my party, who wish to exhaust the avenue of a general election. That's perfectly legitimate for an opposition, but you need to have 2/3 of the House of Commons agree to that. That isn't going to happen. Ultimately, what am I painting a picture of? Impasse. This place is gridlocked. Actually, there are no protesters down there right now, but in there, in that House of Commons, it is gridlocked. And I don't really see how you resolve this issue unless you refer it back to the people, because whether you voted...
That means politics has failed. Politicians have failed.
I'm afraid politics has failed, and you know why on this? It's because ultimately Brexit has failed. Brexit, in the form that it was sold to the British people, has proved absolutely impossible to deliver. And think about it, look, whether you voted Leave or Remain, you certainly didn't vote for this mess, and you didn't vote to basically be in the situation where we are, where we have a withdrawal agreement, no certainty on our future trading relationship, but you're paying a £40 billion divorce bill.
You're assuming that the 17 million people who voted for Brexit aren't happy with Theresa May's proposal. They might say, we just want it done.
But you here at the BBC, you've been reporting poll after poll since the outline of the Prime Minister's plan has been put forward, which has shown that overwhelmingly people do not support what she's put forward. It has managed to bring together, if you like, people on one end of the spectrum of this argument with, you know, people who virulently want us to remain in the European Union with those who desperately want us out. And that is quite some achievement.
Why don't we just get rid of this place altogether? Why don't we empty all the politicians and then just do online voting with the public every time the politicians think they can't get through what they want to get through?
Well, look, we have general elections every 5 years, and regionally and locally we have elections almost every year in this country. Look, ultimately, the issue that Parliament's got is it's reflective of the people in that sense, that we are a divided country. And the problem is that there's a lot of...
divided when it suits, because there was a mandate, there was a vote.
And we're divided, and it was a very... Look, it wasn't a landslide for Leave. You know, unfortunately...
But it was a Leave. I just know what people will be texting and tweeting about this.
And what I would say to them is, look, I'm sorry our politics is broken, and it is. And we fundamentally need to transform it in this country. And make no mistake, if we leave the European Union on the 29th of March 2019, our politics will be just as broken then as it is now. I mean, I suppose I would say that, but I never thought that Brexit was going to solve all the problems we have. But ultimately, we're a democracy, and the people have to be sovereign. I thought that was the whole reason that people were going on this Brexit.
But again, to go back to that point, they have spoken, and politics has not delivered.
The problem was, people were asked to determine whether you leave or remain, fine. But the question was, how do you do so? And what happens if you cannot leave in the way that you wanted to? And the problem with having a binary referendum on that kind of issue, it doesn't deliver an answer. And that's ultimately, I'm sorry, that's why we are in the mess that we're in. And ultimately, I don't see how you resolve this other than referring it back to the people. Now, we at least know what a deal with the EU could look like. Whereas I suppose back when this whole debate started, which everyone watching this programme said, please, I just don't want to talk about Brexit anymore. Why can't you guys just get this thing disposed of? Unfortunately, it just hasn't turned out the way that any of us really thought this was going to turn out. And I don't know what the will of the people is right now about what the mess is that we're in. But all I do know is that the will of the people was not to be where we are now and to have this kind of mess. This is not what people voted for.
Shukrumurna, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
You're watching Afternoon Live. Still no sign of a conclusion to that contempt motion debate. I will return to that as soon as we get a sign of that coming to close. But to other news, because the French Prime Minister has suspended a planned hike in fuel tax for 6 months following some of the worst riots in Paris for decades. In a televised address, he said no tax warranted endangering the unity of the nation. Our correspondent Hugh Schofield gave us the latest from Paris.
It is a climb down. Two questions. One, will this be enough to appease the protesters? I think the answer to that is that there's a good chance that it will. It'll certainly pull off, wean away a good chunk of the moderate yellow vests and probably satisfy them, and that may be enough in itself to deprive the movement of the momentum that it needs, though one cannot rule out the hardliners going on ahead with more protests this Saturday. The bigger question, though, is the legacy. What does this tell us about President Macron? Is he damaged goods? Well, I think up to a point you have to say that he is damaged goods. He's set his reputation on being a new kind of president who does not give in to the street, and here he is giving into the street, doing exactly what his predecessors have done in the past. It also leaves a big hole in the budget for next year because the tax is being suspended, and it was a tax, as taxes are, to raise money, to raise revenue. And then there's the question of his whole reform programme looking ahead. Next year there are loads more reforms that he has planned to the civil service, to start chopping back the size of the state, to pensions, to bring them in line and rationalise them. These are very controversial reforms, and now that the opposition sees that he can turn back, they're going to be much more emboldened next year.
That was Hugh Schofield. Let's just return to the Commons, because Sir Keir Starmer, who brought that contempt motion to the Commons, I think he's just making his closing comments. Let's just hear from him.
We've also been careful to ask the remedy, and that is that the order is complied with before we think of anything else, in fairness to the government. The Father of the House said surely there must be some mechanism, some way that this can be agreed in which the order can be complied with, and lots of members and honourable members, right honourable members, indicated that. What I can say is in the 3 weeks since the debate about the first principle to today, no suggestion has been put to me by the government of any sort of mechanism to enable them to comply with this order, and the House will make of that what it will, and for that reason I must push this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby.
So that's the first vote on the government amendment. Now, if there had been more ayes than noes, the matter would have been referred to the Privilege Committee for them to decide whether the government is in contempt of Parliament. But looks as though it's going to have to go through the lobbies. We'll keep an eye on the developments there, but what we do know is that that has failed, that amendment, so we will wait for the next vote. Now that'll be the motion on the substantial motion, obviously, which is on the contempt motion. So we'll just keep an eye on that. They're going to go through the lobbies, and then we'll have the next vote probably. But what this does mean is that we are now probably an hour or two away from Theresa May coming to start that Brexit debate. There is another vote, first of all, and the amendments that clearly will have some say on what happens if there is a no vote. This is the amendment which is aimed at a cross-party group who've got together and are basically saying they will pass an amendment that means a no deal is avoided. We'll keep an eye, as I say, on events in the Commons, and I'll bring you more from that as we get a clear picture. We will have the headlines as well. That's in a couple of minutes, but now it's time for the weather, and that is with Chris Fawkes.
Hi Simon, thanks a lot. Well, for many of us, we did at least see some sunshine today, but it was quite a chilly old day as well. Now, comparing yesterday to today, we had a lot of cloud yesterday, we've had the sunny skies today, and as far as the temperatures go, well, yesterday we had a high of 15 degrees, but it's been much cooler than that today. Look at Norwich, 13 degrees yesterday, down to about 4 degrees today. Yet you'll have noticed that change in the weather, but it's going to turn milder again over the next 24 hours as this big wodge of cloud continues to work in. That is rain-bearing cloud. It is going to be turning increasingly wet as we go on through this evening and overnight across a large swathe of England and Wales. Fog patches, though, for the time being forming across parts of East Anglia, particularly into Norfolk. Some of those very dense as well. Temperatures dipping down in Scotland and North East England, where we've got the clear skies. But this rain that will continue to move in across Northern Ireland, across Wales, Midlands, southern counties of England, is accompanied by southwesterly winds. So it's turning milder. One of those nights where temperatures will rise through the night across the south. But that still leaves a sharp frost in the north, and across northern Scotland in the countryside I suspect we'll get temperatures down to about -6, -7 degrees in the very coldest spots. Tomorrow then, we've got this wet weather for Northern Ireland, for England and Wales. A fine sunny but cold start to the day in Scotland, with cloud tending to increase later on. As the rain moves in, the southwesterly winds blowing the mild air in, so a big jump upwards in temperatures. A much milder day for many, 13 in London, but we've still got that cold air throughout Scotland and across the north of England as well. By the time we get to Thursday, those milder southwesterly winds will have blown right the way across mainland Scotland as well. You can see it's going to be another wet day with outbreaks of rain, probably easing to patches of drizzle in the afternoon before a spell of heavier rain works into Wales and southwest England later on in the day. Temperatures 10 to 14 degrees, a little bit cooler than that though in Shetland, where we'll see some brighter conditions. Now for Friday, the end of the week, we're looking at the developments. Quite a nasty looking area of low pressure. There's a bit of uncertainty about the track and depth of this low, but it looks like it is going to be bringing a spell of fairly stormy weather to end the week. We're talking about severe gales. The risks of gusts perhaps reaching 70 to 80 miles an hour. Heavy rain. All of this adds up to the risk of some disruption to transport and perhaps power supplies taking a hit as well. So it's a blustery end to the week with those severe gales bringing a risk of disruption, and it stays quite blustery, to be honest, into the weekend as well, still with outbreaks of rain around as well. That's your latest weather.
News, our latest headlines. The BBC has pulled out of hosting a TV debate on Theresa May's Brexit deal. The broadcaster said it was unable to reach an agreement on its proposals for the format. MPs are voting right now on an amendment to a motion arguing the UK government broke Parliament's rules by failing to publish the full legal advice it received on the Brexit plan.
The government is willfully refusing to comply with a binding order of this House, and that is contempt.
No honourable member could say in all honesty that the Attorney General has done anything other than treat this House with the greatest of respect.
In the next few hours, Theresa May will try to sell her Brexit deal to MPs. The debate will last 5 days before MPs vote on her plan. All this comes after the European Union's top legal advisor said Britain could cancel Brexit without the EU's permission by revoking Article 50. Well, let's pick up on what's going on in Westminster now. You can feel the tension mounting because we're still waiting that result on that First Amendment on the contempt motion. Let's talk to Nick Dubois, who's former Conservative MP, Chief of Staff to Dominic Raab. And have you ever known an atmosphere like this at the start of what could be a very lengthy debate?
Well, it is going to be a very lengthy debate, and it should be a very lengthy debate. I can remember tension in the House of Commons. I remember recall of Parliament when it was about whether we went into Syria with military action or not. But no, this is completely different, and it is on a new level. I think the House of Commons is a very uncomfortable place to be for a lot of MPs. I think they've got some huge decisions in front of them, and frankly, there's an awful lot at stake, not least the Prime Minister's future, but obviously the country's future.
What is it that the Prime Minister could say as she opens the debate tonight, and that could be heard in the next 5 days, that would change minds, do you think? Because there's nothing new on the table now, is there?
No, there is nothing new on the table. As you know, I spent the last 4 months in the summer working at the Department for exiting the Union on trying to get a deal that we felt would be able to pass through Parliament, and consequently the Secretary of State, Dominic Raab, resigned over what he felt were some impossible conditions to accept, namely the never-ending possibility of remaining in the EU through the backstop. And I think that still is profoundly difficult issue that the government face in trying to change MPs' minds.
Do you think there's a possibility that if there is a no vote, but it's not a huge defeat for the Prime Minister, if she goes back to the EU, she could come back with something?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. I don't believe, and I know forecasting is a mug's game in politics, as it has been for a couple of years, but I don't believe that these forecasts of 100, 200 defeat are going to happen. The power of number 10...
You believe it will be a defeat?
I do believe at the moment it's going to be a defeat. I think it will be a defeat in the 35-40 numbers. I think the power of number 10, the power of the whips, has yet to be unleashed to its full force. I've seen many rebellions in the past crumble, but there is a huge hurdle here. I do believe it faces defeat, but to answer your question, if it's defeated around 35 votes or whatever, I think the Prime Minister may very well try go back to Brussels, but I don't think there'll be very much on offer, perhaps a fig leaf or two at best. Now, whether, having defeated the government, MPs who voted against it then look over the cliff edge and don't like what they see, some will like what they see, and will not want to support the deal, then there's always a chance to change a few minds.
Well, particularly if they go home for Christmas, talk to some more constituents who say, for heaven's sake, just get this done.
Well, I think there is a sense in the country that people want to get it done, but I don't believe it is any cost. Now look, there are a lot of MPs who do not believe that this is an acceptable deal, that actually the never-ending backstop, the possibility of remaining in the Union...
The Prime Minister says she does not want to use. The EU has said they don't want to use it.
It is inconceivable that the trade deal that would be agreed before December 2020, which is really the only means of avoiding going into the backstop, it is not credible that that can be completed by December 2020. So I think there are a few people who think we won't need the backstop, but realistically it will be needed. And that is a reality parliamentarians have got to face and make their decision on. And I think it is an ask too much for MPs who have a matter of conviction and principle, who believe that we should be leaving the EU as required by the referendum, and leaving it on terms that are actually a full Brexit that does not leave us endlessly tied to taking rules for an open-ended period and effectively being subject to those rules from a foreign institution which, let's face it, can you think of another democracy that would actually enter an agreement willingly to accept rules from another institution for a completely unforeseeable length of time?
Now, we're obviously moments away from a vote on the First Amendment, on the contempt vote. How helpful is that for Theresa May to have this just before she's...
Well, to be fair, I know it's an important issue, but it is a distraction. MPs were desperate to have 5 full days at least to debate this, and they've given up half a day on what I accept is an important issue, but it is, at the end of the day, I think, a distraction from the main issue. There's 2 points of principle at stake here, and they conflict. One is that the government should be able, as conventions dictated over decades, accept legal advice and have that legal advice in confidence. Equally, there is the sovereignty of Parliament, which parliamentarians rightly hold dear. These principles are in conflict at the moment, and I think the government's amendment is a way around that to sort it and letting us get back to what is the most important debate this country has faced for decades.
You say sort it, others would say just kick it down the road a bit.
Well, I think all governments of any colour have conveniently kicked things down the road, but if we have to choose between the 2 most pressing issues, I think we need to get on with this debate now. We can't ignore the principles at stake here, but I actually think the ideas, for example, put up by Ken Clarke of perhaps engaging with Privy Councillors was a sense of compromise that some MPs were seeking, and I think they probably found it.
Nick Dubois, great to talk to you. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Right now, but as you can see, the House is filling. We are awaiting that vote not too far away. Vicky Young is also monitoring this. She's in the lobby at the House of Commons. And just tell us what to look for. We're going to hear an aye and a no, and this is on the amendment.
Yeah, so this is on the government's amendment to that motion, saying that they are in contempt of Parliament for not publishing their full legal advice to MPs, and the amendment which the government put down was slightly strange, and it was referring itself to the Privileges Committee to have a look at all of this. So that in itself is pretty unusual, some seeing that as the government accepting really that it has been in contempt of Parliament, because remember back in November Parliament voted and said that the government should publish in full all the Brexit legal advice that has been given. So the Cabinet and Cabinet Ministers have seen it and been given that advice. MPs, of course, haven't. And their argument has always been that we're being asked to make an incredibly important decision about this deal that Theresa May has brought back. We are entitled to see the legal advice as well. The counter-argument from the government has always been, hang on a minute, it's always been the situation that the government, like any other client, should be allowed to get in confidence legal advice, and it would be setting a very, very unfortunate precedent if it was to change here. So what they've decided to do is to bring forward their own amendment saying that they will be referred to the Privileges Committee, which is the committee that looks at and decides the sanction that there could be. Now, ultimately, ministers can face a sanction if they're found to be in contempt of Parliament. That can involve being suspended from the House of Commons. But I think the point here is that if this were to go through, it means, if you like, this is slightly kicked into the longer grass. It goes to the Privileges Committee. Sometimes they can take months to come up with the result of their inquiries, so it does mean that it delays it, crucially probably beyond that crucial vote next Tuesday. So we are just waiting for the result of that. Now you can tell that it's close by because the House of Commons fills up. That means the MPs have trooped through their various lobbies. Absolutely packed here today. I mean, everywhere around here today is packed. All the MPs know they are on what's called a three-line whip. That means they have to be here to vote at any time. There are various votes going on here today. And of course, at the end of all of this, plus another crucial element happening after this, which is about procedure but could be incredibly important, another very crucial vote for the government, and then eventually Theresa May will get up to start making again that case to MPs, trying to persuade her own side to get behind her and get behind that withdrawal deal that she has got with the EU. So this is, I would say, an unwelcome distraction for the Prime Minister. It's not how today was supposed to pan out. I think the government hoped that yesterday, by sending the Attorney General to the House of Commons, a pretty unusual step to send him, not publishing the legal advice, but getting him to answer questions for 2 hours from MPs, giving a lengthy summary of the advice that he was given. And as many people pointed out, he was pretty candid about what that withdrawal agreement actually means, particularly in terms of the backstop. This is the legal that I think most MPs are very, very concerned about. How tied to that is the government? Would they be able to get out of that backstop? This is, of course, only comes into place if there's no trade agreement in place. It stops the need for any kind of hard border checks between Northern Ireland and Ireland. But there are many MPs concerned that the UK would effectively be stuck in it forever. Now, Geoffrey Crox, the Attorney General, said that wasn't the case. He said that the political reality was that the EU didn't like the backstop either, and actually it would never come to that. But that legal advice about whether there was a unilateral way of the UK out of it was very important to lots of MPs. Now, the government feels this has all been a bit of a stunt by the opposition, trying to distract, trying to embarrass the government. But actually they would say, look, even if you publish this legal advice, really, would it make any difference, given that we know dozens and dozens of MPs on the Tory side and the opposition have said they will vote against her deal anyway. So I reckon this is pretty, because they're taking quite a long time to come out here. They're clearly the tellers, who are the people that have to stand there, two from each side. They have to make sure that they've counted every single person. There's going to be a lot of this in the coming months. It looks now as if they're walking up to the desk. I can't quite see. You can tell because the winner stands to the right as we are looking at all of this. You may be able to see better than me who is going to stand there, but you can get a little bit in advance by maybe a few seconds as to which side has won or not. The question, I suppose, is about the Democratic Unionist Party, of course, who the government relies on for their majority. How have they decided to vote? They said they wanted to see the legal advice published as well. Have they sided with their partners, if you like, in government or not? That will be pretty crucial. And how many of Theresa May's own side have decided to vote against the government, effectively voting to say that your own government is in contempt of Parliament? They're still standing around, Simon.
They keep switching sides, Vicky. I think they're listening to you and trying to throw you. But you mentioned the sanctions, and of course that's important. If this goes through on the late... Oh, let's just hear this.
Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 307. The noes to the left, 311.
Like I have a choice. Thank you. The ayes to the right, 307. The noes to the left, 311. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. The question is the main question as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division, clear the lobby.
Well, Vic, I don't know, but what you thought on that last point, but it sounded to me like the ayes have that, which would suggest that the contempt is going to be
It's a government defeat. That's a government defeat, Simon, on that one. So now they go to the second vote. So the government have been defeated by 311 votes to 307. So their attempt to push this to the Privileges Committee and to some extent make this problem go away, at least in the short term, has failed. So now we're moving to the second vote. Now this second vote is the main question. This is the main motion put down by Labour, by Sir Keir Starmer, which is a basic question really, that the government has been in contempt of Parliament for refusing to publish its legal advice. Now they do it all again. You can tell by those numbers that's a lot of MPs who are here. That's pretty much a full house. They will do it all again. So in 15 minutes we'll get the result of the next vote.
And then, as I was saying just before, the issue of whatever sanctions are agreed on could be rather important, because this is all about numbers from now on, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing here is that it matters to do with the bigger picture, if you like. If ministers were suddenly suspended from the House of Commons before that crucial vote next Tuesday. Now, I'm not saying the government's only looking to next Tuesday and no further, but I think if this was shunted to a committee to come up with a penalty, then really in the short term it's going to have less of an impact. It becomes an impact if a senior cabinet minister gets suspended from the House of Commons, and that clearly is an issue simply in terms of the numbers voting on the government side. But I'm not sure that any of that would happen very imminently. I think even if this vote goes through, this doesn't decide the punishment. That is for another day. This is simply deciding the broader element of whether the government is or is not in contempt of Parliament.
What do you read into the closeness of that vote?
I think that's interesting because, well, I think it shows the reality, doesn't it, of governing with no majority. Now, we'll have to wait to see the numbers. I can't tell from here. You can't see whether the DUP voted in a certain way or not. That, I think, would suggest that they voted not with the government. But we'll have to wait to see until we see the voting, the names. We get to see the names of who's voted which way.
Yeah, and we just need to make the point that before Theresa May stands up to start selling her Brexit deal, there is another vote which is very important in terms of the no-deal option.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, this feels like a bit of a sideshow in some ways, important as it is. What we're coming to next is the business motion. Now, again, this is all about procedure. It's about how the next few days go, how long they debate for, which amendments are taken to the motion next Tuesday, and they're all looking ahead to that big vote next Tuesday. But it's become slightly more complicated for the government because Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General, a person who's very much on the Remain side of the argument, who wants another referendum, he has tabled an amendment which has cross-party support, and what it's trying to do is to look at what might happen if Theresa May's deal is voted down next Tuesday. It's all about whether Parliament can have a greater say in what happens next. As things stand, if her deal is voted down, the government has 21 days to come back to make a statement laying out what they want to do next. Now, Parliament had no power to really change that or give their own opinion about what should happen next. It was a matter of accepting or not accepting what the government wanted to do. What the amendment would do, if it were to go through later today, would be to give Parliament more of a say. So if there was a majority for something else in the Parliament, they could make that very clear by amending the motion. Now, I've heard from several Conservatives who are in favour of that amendment. They think they've got the numbers to defeat the government. We'll have to find out later. We understand that the DUP is going to vote with the government on that, so that is some good news for the government. But Conservative MPs, those rebels if you like, feel that they might still have the numbers to defeat the government later. So Theresa May's day could be about to get worse.
Yes, and of course in the last hour we've also heard that the BBC is pulling out of hosting that television debate on Sunday night, so that muddies waters as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been sceptical that this was going to happen, to be honest. I don't know if either side wanted it enough to make the compromises they were going to have to make to do it. And you'll know that the BBC, of course, came up with a format which was partly a head-to-head debate between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, but also with a panel to ask questions, because the BBC felt that they had to reflect more than just the views of Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, who, of course, at the last election both did go into that election on a manifesto promise to deliver the referendum and to leave the EU. So there were other people saying, hang on a minute, that's not really a fair debate of where we are, because there are others who feel there are still many other options, including another referendum, some other kind of arrangement with the UK maybe being in the European Economic Area, you know, being much more closely tied to the EU. So the BBC's answer to that was to have a panel. Labour didn't like the idea of that, and Theresa May said she did. The alternative suggestion is from ITV. That's for a basic head-to-head, which is what Jeremy Corbyn wanted, but Theresa May hasn't agreed to that as far as we know. So at the moment, certainly not happening on the BBC. We'll have to wait and see if ITV managed to get Theresa May on side.
Right, it was interesting. We saw Theresa May just leaving the chamber there a moment ago. Just talk us through the logistics, if you like. We will get this next vote in the next, what, 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
No, I think we are still quite some time away. It says here 16, yeah, we've got 10 minutes, Simon.
And then we get another debate before Theresa May eventually gets to start.
Yeah, that's right. So then we move on to that other debate, which is about the business element of what goes on. And that really is procedural, apart from we will get then that slightly crucial vote now on Dominic Grieve's attempt to give Parliament more of a say if Theresa May's deal is voted down. And then after that we get Theresa May opening this 5 days of debate, and that will go on a long time because each day has got an allocation of hours, and it's 8 hours, I think, at that point. So well, we can do the maths once Theresa May has stood up. If she stands up at 7 in the evening, it's going to be a very late night, Simon.
So
I don't think he can hear me. It's going to be a late night, Simon, is what I said. So after 7 o'clock, 8 hours of debate. I don't know if you'll still be there on the green at that point.
It's been a long day, Vicky, let alone a late night ahead. So for Theresa May, when that debate eventually gets underway, what time do you think she could be going on till then?
She will be there certainly at the beginning of the debate. I doubt she'll stay for all of it, but I mean, I think it's pretty clear that she will be in the House of Commons trying to persuade people to come over to her way of thinking on all of this. So, you know, we understand she's been having meetings with waverers, with those who've said they're against her deal, trying to persuade them that it is the best deal that there is, that the only deal that it is. And her argument, of course, has gone from being it's my deal or no deal. That has been slightly refined to end up being that there's a possibility of no Brexit at all. And I think the government will be hoping that that's a false alarm, actually. They shut the doors and then they carry on for another 10 minutes. And yeah, they're refining the argument really, saying that there might be no deal, there might be no Brexit because the possibility of another referendum, the possibility of some kind of compromise, and I think that's what's interesting about what's coming after this. The suggestion that if her deal is voted down, what is the way through? And that's been what people here have been struggling with for so long. No one can give a clear answer as to what the plan B is. The government, of course, doesn't want to talk about a plan B at this point. There are Brexiteers, I think, who would say, look, if her deal is voted down, she has to go back to Brussels, she has to go back to the EU and say, right, you've seen from these